I'm Robert and I'm here to tell you that you're listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
Welcome to Delivering on Climate Change, our collective challenge. Welcome to the Decarbonisation Dialogue. I am Hannah Walker, and I believe that the best way to communicate a message is by being passionate about what you are talking about. Through that passion, I believe you take people with you and create action using your influence to make change and make a difference. Today, our task is to get all of us to net zero. Today, I have Professor Neil Jennings with us as guest, so thank you very much to Neil. Neil is Partnership Development Manager at the Grantham Institute at Imperial. One of Neil's main jobs at Imperial is to coordinate a cross-college group interested in the health and benefits of climate action. He is responsible for supporting the development of strategic partnerships with policymakers, business and non-governmental organisations. He has a specific interest in the co-benefits of climate action, how tackling climate change can help create a greener, cleaner, fairer future, and how those co-benefits can be better considered in the decision-making process. Neil sits on advisory steering groups for the Blueprint Coalition of local government representatives, researchers, and green groups, and the One World Living programme run by London councils. Within Imperial, Neil is part of the Interdisciplinary Climate Care Centre, a group of researchers, designers, policy experts and educators aiming to understand and support mental health in the current climate and ecological crises. The team published a briefing paper on the impact of climate change on mental health in 2021 that has been covered by news outlets around the world and cited by the World Health Organization. Outside of work, Neil is trustee for a charity called the Reach Foundation, which is trying to increase opportunities for young people in Feltham and increasingly around other parts of the UK. Welcome to Neil.
Thanks, Hannah. Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your career. What has led you to climate action? Because today it's all about climate action and research, particularly around mental health and behaviours.
Yeah, so I've been at the Grantham Institute at Imperial College now for about 7 or so years. And I suppose by background, I studied geography 25 years ago. And it became increasingly obvious that there was this thing called climate change, which was happening. It was caused by humans and not enough action was occurring on it. I went on to do a PhD, and during that PhD, about a year in, I'd read hundreds of articles about the issue and kind of saw what was happening in the outside world and realised not enough was. So I then set up a not-for-profit programme called the Student Switch Off, trying to encourage university students to get involved in pro-environmental behaviours. Ran that for 12 years and took that internationally, and then realised I was too old to be hanging around halls of residence chatting to students about energy saving. So joined the Grantham Institute, as I say, about 7 years ago. And then it was about 5 years ago where someone called Emma Lawrence, who also works at Imperial, came to the Grantham Institute and said, there's this thing, are you aware about the relationship between climate change and mental health? And it wasn't on our radar at all. And I have to admit, initially, I was quite sceptical about how there could be a link. But that initial discussion led to what has been one of our kind of most productive parts of work over the last 5 or so years, and including, interest at the international level in our work as well, which has been very, very, very productive, I would say.
Because, of course, there is this link, and I've heard you speak about the key elements of climate action and climate change, which is it's linked to health, which is the clean air aspect, reducing risks of illness, poverty, jobs, and of course, energy security. So we're looking at massive challenges as we face climate change. As we say, it's not just about our future, it's about making things better for people today, whether it's the cost of living, whether it's health, whether it's getting children today to school, equalities. What does it mean to talk climate action? And do you think it is just the responsibility of government and business?
Yeah, I think when engaging with the public and talking about climate change, it can often, to some people, seem as if it's this kind of distant threat, both in terms of time in the future, but also in terms of space, it being other parts of the world that are more impacted. I think we're coming increasingly to realise that many of these issues, and we just had a number of heat waves recently, are much closer, both in time and in space. But obviously, a lot of the things that we need to do to tackle climate change are things which, quite frankly, we should be doing anyway in terms of the other benefits that they provide. And I think that's really important in the way in which we talk about climate change, because by emphasising some of those other benefits which you've highlighted, to helping to make homes more affordable for people to heat, helping to improve the quality of the air that we all breathe, so that kids don't get asthma. Like many of those other benefits that climate action can bring are often actually the things which are more meaningful to people on a kind of local level as well. So I think obviously a key thing is the way in which we adapt our messages around climate change to different audiences, and try and think of ways in which we can talk about climate change in a way which resonates most with the other sort of day-to-day issues that people are facing.
And let's talk more carefully about that, because when we're talking about air quality, for example, and I know that you've quoted a figure, and which kind of my jaw dropped, because obviously the link with the poor air quality. I think you've quoted a figure saying in the UK, 40,000 premature deaths a year as a result of poor air quality, because all of our organs, are affected by poor air quality, whether it's, I think you've talked about dementia, you've talked about cancer, other illnesses, breathing, COPD, all of that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that figure, that's the equivalent numbers of deaths, the kind of cumulative toll that air quality takes on society, by knocking off, days, weeks off people's lives. And so that's the cumulative toll. It's up to about, I think the updated figure is something like up to about 35,000, equivalent of 35,000 premature deaths a year as a result of poor air quality. So as you say, like, poor air quality affects every organ of our bodies, and it affects people from in utero, so before people are born, through to increasing the risk of people getting things like dementia and Alzheimer's in later life as well. And the more we've learned about the impact of air quality and health over the last few years, the more we've realised kind of how far-reaching some of those impacts are. And the majority of that air pollution comes from the burning of fossil fuels one way or another. So it's a particular issue in urban areas where we have large numbers of cars and vans on the roads, but also it comes as we are gradually shifting away from petrol and diesel vehicles and increasing the amount of electric vehicles. So then the importance of other sources of air pollution becomes more relevant, such as the way we heat our homes. So the gas boilers, for example, and there's opportunities there in terms of sort of the role that climate action can play as we shift away from gas towards things like heat pumps to help to basically decarbonise, while also helping to improve local air quality as well.
You see, at Salix, we also work on, as well as working with the public sector, big public sector buildings and looking at energy efficiency measures like hospitals, schools, libraries, universities, etc. We also work in the homes and making sure people have a more efficient, warmer home, a more comfortable environment. And of course, this is directly linked to poverty. If a home is harder to heat, you've got a cold home, you're more likely to get sick, possibly miss school. If you get sick, you can lose your income, etc. So is that message clear? And what has your work found specifically on creating warmer, better homes and the impact it has?
Yeah, so we conducted some research a couple of years ago where we shared some of the list of co-benefits that can result from climate action with people via focus groups and also via questionnaire survey, and asked whether people had a knowledge of those things already, of those opportunities that climate action can bring. And many people didn't. When we asked people what they thought they could do to tackle climate change on a kind of personal level, lots of that was around, the number one issue that people brought up was, I could recycle a bit more. And to me, that's kind of a challenge in terms of public awareness around climate action, because if people believe that the things that need to be done to tackle climate change are stuff like recycling, then why would they ever think that climate action could improve their lives? Now, if we talk more about the opportunities and the things that need to be done to tackle climate change around decarbonising, improving the energy efficiency of our housing, making it easier for people to be able to keep themselves warm. That's a really positive message that can be told there. And so within the questionnaire survey we ran, we shared these 8 different co-benefits with members of the public. Homes that are more affordable to heat came out as the number one in terms of importance. That was the kind of the number one thing that was most popular with the public. But of all of the 8 co-benefits, all of them perceived as either important or very important by over half of respondents. So there was a widespread widespread support for all of those outcomes, which include other things like job creation, improving air quality, stronger communities and stuff that can result from climate action as well. So broad popularity. But I guess a key message that also came through is the kind of need to adapt messages around climate action to different audiences to understand where people are at and which aspect of climate action resonates the most in terms of the benefits it can provide to them in their day-to-day lives.
And in your research, you also found that people who experience problems caused by not tackling climate change, such as living in poorly insulated homes or breathing this unclean air, were much more likely to support climate action related to those issues. Can you explain that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of some of the conversation that you hear in the media is about the cost of net zero, and we don't talk enough about the cost of not zero. That is to say that the situation we're in at the moment is by far from a perfect situation, as illustrated by the kind of excess deaths we have in the UK as a result of poor air quality, for example. But when it comes to people's exposure, so a specific example I'll give was one of the focus groups we ran, which was with a Somali community group from one of the councils in London, and everyone was united by the fact that they'd all been born in Somalia, but they actually geographically all lived in different parts of the borough. And one of the exercises we did was to share 8 different potential benefits of climate action with them and ask them to rank them from what was most important to them down to what was the least important. And then we went around the group and asked them. And as we went around the group, every single person in that group said improving air quality and health was the most important benefit that climate action could bring to them, specifically because they were talking about them having asthma, their kids having asthma, having eczema, and having to sort of deal with the day-to-day consequences of poor air quality. And as I said, these people didn't all live in the same area, but they were united by the fact they came from the Somali community and were born in Somalia originally. So it's kind of an illustration here of the inequalities that exist in society, to the extent that those from ethnic minority backgrounds, for example, are much more likely to live in areas with higher air quality. Similarly, for people from lower economic, with no lower income levels. So there are real opportunities there to address some of the other kind of challenges that society is facing around inequality, for example, by helping to tackle climate change and focusing on that on the areas where there's highest levels of air pollution, for example.
There's a huge amount of research going on, and I'd like to hear more about how you translate that with your work with government, because how can climate policies win confidence and deliver those positives? Because you just alluded to the fact that net zero has become a difficult word, actually. It might be seen as expensive or unobtainable. Tell me about your work with government, how we get this message, this research across.
We've done a fair bit of work with local authorities over the last few years, particularly working alongside a charity called Ashton. So around 5 or 6 years ago, when the majority of local authorities across the country declared climate emergencies and set quite ambitious net zero targets, they obviously did so in response to the kind of increasing awareness around climate change, but often did so without any additional budget to help to meet those ambitious objectives. So it became even more important to look at the opportunities to align climate action with other key strategic priorities in their local area around things like public health. We worked with this charity Ashton, who put together a toolkit of practical things that local authorities could do to try and align and multi-problem solve, essentially. And one of the things that we've discussed recently with local authorities is that in many cases, some of their communications around of interventions that have been put in place by the climate team of councils, for example, around improving air quality, encouraging more active travel. In many cases, the communications that go out to the public will actually kind of front and center the health benefits of that action. And actually, the kind of discussions around climate change as a kind of motivation for that particular intervention may actually figure comparatively low down in the kind of the rationale. And that's simply because that's the bit that cuts through and resonates more with local residents and is more meaningful to them. So that's, some of the work that we've been doing is around kind of better understanding how local authorities go about communicating these co-benefits to their citizens. It's often the case that they're kind of centering the opportunities around improving public health, helping to reduce inequality in a local area by helping to kind of target climate related funding towards, for example, social housing, where it may be comparatively poor in terms of its energy efficiency. So that's a fair bit of the work that we've done recently is focused on the kind of local level, because I think it's a key area where a lot of action can take place, where it really resonates mostly with residents in terms of tying in with some of the other things on people's minds.
So it's very much at grassroots level, because you believe that is where fundamentally a lot of the change happens at that grassroots level.
That's right. And I think, and I suppose if we think about the kind of pathway that we need to go on, ambitious targets that we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it's really important that that kind of phase of action is associated with high levels of public support. We have had traditionally in the UK high levels of public support for climate action, and we still do. But to maintain that, it's really important that people see the positive benefits that climate action is bringing to their local area, and that links in with the practical actions that take place on a local level around housing, around transport, and the benefits they can bring, but also about the way in which we talk about that as well. I think one thing that we often don't do well enough within the kind of broad environmental movement is to talk about the positive aspects of stuff. A lot of it can be quite doom and gloom, which isn't always particularly helpful in terms of motivating change, and that's where the co-benefits can really kind of come in terms of that positive message of change. You can think about, what do people want for their local area? Well, people want to have a home they can afford to heat. They want to have air that's clean to breathe, so that their kids don't get ill, and so their parents are less likely to get ill, and themselves, and things like that. And you want green space around you. Like, it's really quite a positive thing that climate action should bring. If we do get to net zero, the physical places we live should actually be really, really nice. And we don't do a good enough job, I think, of talking about that positive vision of the future, because that's the bit that can actually be really empowering and motivating for people.
So do you think we should talk more about climate action rather than climate crisis?
To some extent, yeah. I think there's often a balance that needs to be struck, and obviously it's always dependent on the audience you're talking to as to the kind of that relative balance. But we find this ourselves. I work in a university. We do lots of climate related research. As a consequence, we often get approached by members of the public saying, "Okay, I get the issue, but what can I actually do about it?" So about 5 years ago, we put together this 9 things you can do about climate change as a kind of like really simple messages of practical things people could do, like around energy efficiency, flying less, around eating less meat, and so on. The practical things that people can do. And on Imperial's website, we have a whole bunch of different stories about our science, and that's the number one viewed story on our website by a country mile, because people get the issue generally and actually just want to know, okay, please give me some suggestions of things I can do about it, because people want that kind of those ideas and those solutions in many cases, because that also helps to improve our kind of sense of feeling that we're contributing to tackling this big problem, which can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming.
That's right. And we have some level of control over that, at least within our own sphere of activity and our own world.
Exactly.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Reach Foundation and your work with the Reach Foundation?
Sure. Yeah. So this is something I do in the kind of evenings and weekends as helping out as a trustee. And so this is for a foundation which is based in Feltham in West London, and it's aligned to a local school called the Reach Academy. And the overall vision of the school is basically have a kind of cradle to career approach for education. So that is to support families and kids before they get to school, and indeed afterwards as well. There's lots of evidence around the kind of the transition between primary school and secondary school being quite disruptive for young kids. So this is a school which runs from 5 years old through to 18 in terms of formal. So that's a complete continuity between those years. And then also provides support for things like nursery care beforehand, for support for expectant mothers before they actually have their kids. And then after the kids have left the school as well, provides additional support to get them into work. So it's kind of cradle to career approach. And I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but the educational outcomes for these students, drawn from an area which is of comparatively high social deprivation, is astounding in comparison to the uplift it has provided for the educational outcomes and for those opportunities that those young people have. And so the work has gone incredibly well in Feltham, and so now is being scaled out we have kind of hubs down in Cornwall and Devon, in Norfolk, up in the northeast, where communities and school leaders are basically being supported to set up equivalent cradle to career models, which often relates to kind of the bridging between schools and local authorities, for example, in terms of the provision of related care and support, including around health, for example, that it means that parents are better supported to then help to support their kids as well.
And so that's very much something you do, as you say, in your spare time. If you have spare time, that is something, as you say, it's the evening shift.
Exactly, yeah. It can be a bit challenging to fit it all in, but it's an incredibly. I have a very small role as a trustee, but every time I have these meetings and hear of the work that the foundation's been doing, properly changing people's lives around the country, it is a very inspiring thing to be working with in a very small way. And we all try and make a difference in one way or another in our lives, and it's just nice to be able to have an opportunity to contribute to a really fantastic
and
charity.
You can see that change. But so what next for you? I mean, it's highly inspirational. You've achieved a lot so far. What's next for you in the research that you're doing there?
My real interest at the moment is around the links between climate change and health, and both in terms of the impact that climate change is having on health. So we do a lot of work on the links between climate change and mental health, for example, at Imperial, but also particularly in the practicalities of how decisions get made and how the health-related benefits that climate action can bring, how on a practical level they get considered or not in the way in which decisions get made. So we've just been doing some research with people from around the country, from local authority up to national level, and we're publishing a report in the next couple of months that basically kind of highlights the opportunities for better consideration of these health-related benefits and the way in which decision gets made, because ultimately they can help to achieve additional beneficial outcomes from climate action, which don't always get incorporated and considered into the decision-making process. And our views is that doing so can further help to make the case for faster climate action and climate action that's embedded in a way which really helps to make a difference to people's day-to-day lives by improving their physical and mental health.
Super. Thank you very much, Neil. I mean, it's a very positive stance that you're taking, and it's great to hear about all the action and the research because obviously knowledge is power, isn't it? And it moves us forward. Thank you very much to Neil Jennings for joining me today on the Decarbonisation Dialogue. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we work for tomorrow's world. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels, and please let us know what you think at podcast@salixfinance.co.uk. Thank you very much to Neil.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Zoe, and I'm here to tell you that you've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.